And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Theological Insomniac. I'm Randy White, and I am glad that you have joined us here tonight as we come for news of the normal, the abnormal, the paranormal. It's whatever you want to talk about. That's what we do on these nights. It's Friday night or Saturday morning for several of you, because we got several from, two from Australia, one from New Zealand. It's sometime Friday. Maybe it's Friday afternoon to you. Good day. Good day. How do you say that? Good day. Good day, mates. Good to see you. And good to see Wisconsin here, and California here, and Arizona here. And there's more Arizona. I got two Aussies and two Azzies. Is that what you call yourself? I'm not sure. But this, my friend, is a very good day, and I think we should stop and celebrate. Let me get the news up here, and let's see, I got to get everything stopped here that I'm supposed to get stopped, and then let's get into the news of the day, something that you should not forget. And here, my friend, we go.
Throughout the world, throngs hail the end of the war in Europe. It is 5 years and more since Hitler marched into Poland. Years full of suffering and death and sacrifice. Now the war against Germany is won. A grateful nation gives thanks for victory. Hundreds of thousands crowd into American churches to give thanks to God. President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity and into light. Much remains to be done. The victory won in the West must now be won in the East. The whole world must be cleansed of the evil from which half the world has been freed. United, the peace-loving nations have demonstrated in the West that their arms are stronger by far than the might of dictators or the tyranny of military cliques that once called us soft and weak. The power of our peoples to defend themselves against all enemies will be proved in the Pacific War as it was proved in Europe.
Historic pictures of the last days of the war in Europe show American and Russian troops as they joined at Torgau on the River Elbe, splitting German armies in two. United States General Reinhardt meets Red Army General Rusakov, a meeting that spelled out certain German defeat. At Allied Mediterranean headquarters in Italy, the Germans unconditionally give up all of Italy and southern Austria. In civilian clothes, representatives of the German armies signed the surrender document. General W.D. Morgan, representing Supreme Mediterranean Commander Alexander, signs for the Allies. Preceding the final capitulation at Reims, this surrender eliminated 1 million German troops. Inside Germany itself, the Allies seized the famous Stadium of Nuremberg, scene of countless Nazi Party rallies. With the capture of this famous southern German city, the American flag flouts out the swastika. In a symbolic gesture, American troops destroy the Nazi Party emblem.
Wasn't that good? We won 75 years ago today. We won. And celebrating that victory, VE Day. I loved that at the end. I had never seen that, and I wonder why we don't just play that over and over and over again. Maybe I'll ask Nathan if he can do a little loop of it where that Nazi emblem is blown up, and after it first gets the American flag over it, and then it is blown up. So I don't know if we've got any listeners that were in duty there 75 years ago. If so, you're probably in bed by now. But God bless those troops who brought us the victory 75 years ago today. But it wasn't done, because that was just the victory in Europe. And of course, there was the victory also in Japan, VJ Day, that would come later. I pulled up a newspaper here. Here it is from Salinas, California. Nazi war ends 3:01 p.m. Well, we're a few hours late on celebrating, but let's go ahead and celebrate anyway. Get you a Diet Coke and some popcorn, and let's have a good time celebrating. But this was Salina, California. Do they pronounce it Salinas? I'm not real sure. But look at, I want to show you something. Nazi war ends. Truman calls on U.S. to continue its job. Now, let's read the article here just a little bit. A couple of interesting things that I find here. President names coming Sunday day of prayer. Work, 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 because our victory is only half won, Truman tells America. He warns Japanese of what they will get. Now, maybe this was in the day when men were men, when they went out and did war like they were supposed to do war. That is, they went to win it. And that's exactly what they did. But let's take ourselves back to 1945 and see just a little bit. President Truman today proclaimed victory in Europe, but told the nation its fighting job would be finished only when the last, as you know, later happened. He said victory is only half won. He gave this counsel for the months to come: work, work, work. And he gave this advice to the Japanese: surrender. That's the way a president needs to talk. Even a very soft-spoken Missourian like Truman was, he understood what had to happen. And very few presidents have understood that down through the years, unfortunately, and some certainly better than others. Let me back up. I kind of like Truman. I know Truman was a Democrat, and he was a Southern Baptist. That's 2 marks against him. But I kind of like the guy. Just calm, soft-spoken. The buck stops here. There's some good things about Truman, weren't there? I'm no expert on Truman, so pardon me if he wasn't all that good, but he certainly won the war, and he's the one, of course, that did the work in New Mexico, paid for the work in New Mexico, for the work on Hiroshima and Nagasaki that ended up winning that war. So his advice to the Japanese: surrender. Surrounded by his government leaders, Truman issued the proclamation of victory in his statement of work yet to do at the historic news conference in the White House. He broadcast them to the nation outside while the president spoke. A chill rain fell. And it goes on for a couple of paragraphs and talk about work. In fact, down here, at the War and Navy Department, today we call that the Department of Defense, but at the War and Navy Department, it was a quiet day. The War Department had planned a ceremony outdoors, but it was canceled. The work to do. We got to get over to the Pacific. We're not done yet. We can't celebrate too fast. He says this, the president said, is a solemn but glorious hour. He voiced the thought of millions by adding, how I wish Franklin Roosevelt had lived to see this season, rain, day. The president reminded the nation in its flush victory that it had not been fighting alone. And he proclaimed, proclaimed Sunday, May 13th, a day of prayer. I call upon the people of the United States, whatever their faith, to unite in offering joyful thanks to God for the victory we have won, and pray that He will support us to the end of our present struggle and guide us into the way of peace. I also call upon my countrymen to dedicate this day of prayer to the memory of those who have given their lives to make possible our victory. And he goes on and shares some other things that are there. Here's a little local news right here from this, again, I'm assuming you pronounce it Salinas, California, but perhaps it's Salinas, as in Kansas. As it says, guns in the Pacific. And of course, on the West Coast, that was a big deal. Now, let me also note, and then we'll get into your questions and comments and chats today, but let me also note on this particular newspaper, it has a picture right in the middle of the newspaper. War 301, go down just a little bit. Victors to police these German zones. Now, Germany was this section here. The lines were these various countries of Austria and Hungary and Czechoslovakia and whatnot. But this section and this section and this section, you can kind of see gray, white, and dark hashed, I guess you would call it. The Americans would have this section. The Brits would have this section, and the Soviets would have this section right here. Interesting that on the very day they celebrate victory in Europe, they established and printed in the paper that which was going to be really the major issue of the Cold War and the clearest picture of the Cold War, and that was going to be this line right here that would go through Germany and have East Germany and West Germany, and of course the biggest picture of the Cold War was the Berlin Walls, I believe it was, from West Germany, was itself divided. And that became such a picture of the Cold War later. So they were kind of right in saying, don't celebrate yet, it's not over. But even when VJ Day came, Victory in Japan, and the Japanese did give an unconditional surrender, just as Truman had told them they needed to do. They would have been better to do it off on this day. They later on did that, but then of course the Cold War, and we'll talk about that later. But isn't that great, Truth Gardner, that they blew it up? They blew it up. How in the world has this been forgotten? I know it was 75 years ago, but they blew up that Nazi symbol. I didn't know that until I knew today was VE Day, and so I just went on looking for some things, and I just happened to find that old newsreel, excuse me, and I thought they blew it up after they put the American flag. I didn't know that. Again, think we ought to carve that on a mountain or something, of put somehow where it plays every day, of blowing that thing up, reminding us we won the war. And all of the Western world ought to celebrate that thing that goes on there. How wonderful, how wonderful. Well, let's get into your your chats, your comments as we talk tonight about the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal. See what you have to say. It's a pretty free-flowing broadcast. If you have been with us before, we're not very formal. No coat and tie on. And we got a glow-in-the-dark computer because I don't know how to fix the lighting. And up here at Studio B, that's up on the top of the mountain in northern New Mexico. It's beautiful here with a lovely starry sky you can see there. I just went out and took a picture of that. That's our sky there, exactly. Whatever. Vina, down in Australia, should President Trump give General Flynn his old job back? Can you see the heads explode if General Flynn is given his old job back? First of all, I would say somebody has to go to jail over this thing. As a matter of fact, can I say maybe more than that? Because really what they did, and I haven't followed through on this just terribly closely, but all you have to do is read the headlines on this one, and you say, this is treasonous. What I just, it was the Democrats that did it, the deep state, fueled by the Democrats and enabled by the Democrats in the House. They're the ones that did it. And they set General Flynn up and they put him in prison because he was the one that was standing between them and the eradication of President Trump, which was what they really wanted. They were convinced that with General Flynn as a national security advisor, that he was too savvy, and they would not be able to fulfill their coup. I really think what they did was more than criminal; it was treasonous. Now, I think the punishment for treason is pretty bad, and that it is just such a brazen act against the nation. I think somebody high up needs to if nothing else, be an example for this, because if somebody can get away with doing what they have done to Michael Flynn, then we're sunk. They can do it to me. They can do it to you. I believe the representative from Tennessee said the other day, or Kentucky, Johnson, where's he from? And that if all that happens is General Flynn goes back and lives a life, even if he gets his job back, we'll talk about that in a moment. I'll get to it. But if that's all that happens, and those other snakes continue in their jobs or in their careers or in the House and Senate, then we have got just huge problems. Now, General Flynn getting his job back. I think the only issue we've got to deal with there is he did confess to, what was it? To doing something bad. Now, did he do that under duress? It looks like it. Is any court going to take his confession? No. But probably you would have to deal with that before you gave him his job back. But wouldn't it? I mean, just like the Nazi symbol exploding, you can just see who's the rat in the house. Who is that guy? I should remember. Schiff. You could just, I mean, his eyeballs would pop out, wouldn't they? I think I might write President Trump. See if we could make that happen. Someone in the state of Alcatraz, no names mentioned, says if the innocent inmates of Alcatraz decide to gather earlier than the warden permits, are they breaking the handbook rules of Romans 13 at this point? Inmates are hungry for freedom. There's our coded question for the day. Well, Romans 13, you may remember, speaks about authority, and it says, let every soul be subject unto higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. Let's just say that our nation, I noticed there's little comments about our nation that we'll get to. Our nation, which was founded on Christian principles, would not have been founded if the founding fathers, including the black-robed brigade, the preachers of the day, which gave the philosophical movement behind the Revolutionary War, had they interpreted Romans 13, 1 and 2 to say that when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one group of people to dissolve their governments, and you shouldn't do that very often, all those things the Declaration of Independence said. If they interpreted Romans 13 like this, there never would have been a United States. Now, I think that we do recognize that there are higher powers. But is the governor of California or the governor of New Mexico or the governor of Michigan, wherever you want to go, is that the higher power that is referred to there? And let's take this and bring it closer to home. If the pastor, who is a higher power in the overseer, the bishop, if in his realm the pastor tells you, you cannot drink whole milk, you can only drink skim milk, first of all, I would get another pastor. If he tells you that, do you say, well, honey, I will not drink whole milk anymore because the pastor says so? Well, he would be good, and the wife would be good if he doesn't do it, to say, it ain't none of his business what kind of milk we drink. The pastor may have power, but it's not over kind of what kind of milk we put on our Fruit Loops. So I think that just like I cannot tell my church members what kind of milk to put on their cereal, that is out of my power. So they should recognize the authority that's given in the pastor where that authority is there. Now, does the governor, or anyone else for that matter, really have the authority to tell the inmates that they cannot gather in a public gathering, especially for worship? I really do think somebody's got to take some of these things all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's in their state and the Supreme Court in our country. I've said this from the beginning. I think that for safety's sake, we have some ordinances on our state books and local books that have given way too much power. And I don't think they were ever intended to give that much power. They were never intended to be 45, 50, 60-day kind of things that say, for the next 2 or 3 months, you can't go to church. Now, I don't have a problem at all with the governor saying, please don't. This is going to be bad if you do. We're going to have problems if you do. You're going to give everybody cooties and everything else, or back in the days of the war, when they said, we need everybody to turn out your lights. They had a right to keep their lights on, but it could be deadly if you do this, this little light of mine at the wrong time. And so that bullet of the government, go for it. Use it as strongly as you can. They do it all the time anyway. But I think you're okay, honestly, to break the handbook of rules and to perhaps gather together on a Sunday. Now, if you're doing that, by the way, nobody here would do that, of course. But if somebody was doing that, here would be my suggestion: that you don't do it for publicity's sake, and you try everything you could do not to have any publicity about it. Why? Because you don't need that. Your neighbor doesn't need that. Your church members don't need that. It's not going to advance anything. So scatter the cars, walk through, have a little, secret gathering, if you will. Use the side door, all those kind of things. I think all that's a good thing. I think there are some times when you stick your nose up at the authorities. I personally, anyway, it's my thinking that we just happened to all gather. We just showed up. Oh my goodness, where did you come from? And have a little plausible deniability there. What do y'all think? Is it time to go to church? I know that we're all from around the country and around the world even, and so there are different regulations wherever you are. The New Mexico regulations are still in effect. Home orders through May the 15th. Do they get extended? Do they get loosened up as many other states are already happening? What takes place there? I guess we shall see through all of that, shouldn't we? Let's see. Question from Rick out in California. While Israel is very special very special to us dispensationalists, how would you classify the United States? Blessed with a special grace? Certainly, there is no country like the U.S. in its founding. I certainly do agree that there is no country like the U.S. in its founding. And in that, I completely rejoice. And we have such a story and such a history that really is just amazing. And of course, many of you are aware that we have a new book coming out at Dispensational Publishing. While we're on the subject, I just will bring it up. Go to the shop button and then pick up Patrick Henry. It ships May 22nd. But guess what? If you go ahead and order it today, you get to start reading it today. You get the download, you get the PDF, and then the actual book, which is a very nice 500-page book. Well, that's from a publisher's perspective. It's got pieces of paper in it, or 250 pieces of paper in it, because we count both sides. It just tells us, so much of the story, and there are so many of these guys that we could look at. This one was written in 1898, be a good reminder of all of that. But back to the question here, and that is, does the United States have some kind of special grace? First of all, and I've said this before, I don't think that the United States has a prophetic role. I don't think that the United States is, in prophecy. Therefore, you can't pick up your Bible and go and say, oh, yeah, there's the United States right there. I don't think that. Obviously, some people do. I don't see that. Now, was there a special grace? Can I say yes and no? It was the grace of God, but it was the grace of God given through individuals that decided to express that grace. I'm convinced God gives his grace to individuals. And when individuals share the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ with other individuals, and they become Christians, and they open up this book of grace, and they begin to read it, and our founding fathers, and from the Pilgrims and onward, they weren't all good right dividers. Many of them were covenant theologians, Calvinists, Puritan. But nonetheless, they knew the Lord, and they walked with him, and they began to carry out his grace. And it is really, can I say, and some people would almost take this as offensive, but it was the grace of the Pilgrims. It was the grace of the founding fathers, which was the grace of God going through them, but they were expressing it, the Spirit of God within them, and they were not quenching the Spirit. They were allowing the Spirit to flow through them. Now, I think let's suppose that today there was still some territory out there and that we could go, an uninhabited territory, and we could go to it. I'm not sure where it is. I almost would like to know, because November is election time. You never know what's going to happen at election. Just look at the last one and you'll see. But if that place was there, I think that Christians today could still gather together and say to themselves, we want to establish a nation based upon the right division of the word. In many cases, it would look like the United States without California. But would that be the grace of God? Yes, but the grace of God flowing through individual Christians and local churches. I really think that that's where I would put the grace of God in the founding of the United States, which means the good news is that it's not a, can I say, providential thing? That is, the founding of the United States was not providential. That is to say, God was not working it and making it happen, but rather what it was is that individual Christians, William Bradford and others, said, hey, let's get on a boat and let's go over here. Roger Williams, hey, let's start a Providence plantations where we can worship God in freedom. And this was it was the grace of God, but it was the expression of various believers with that grace, which means we could change our nation today. We could change our world today. We're not like the Calvinists and have to wait for God to do some kind of providential work. We just begin to do some kind of work of providence, if you will, work of the grace of God. And so that's a good news thing, I think, for there. Lorna down our Kiwi here down in New Zealand. I heard someone say that their country of South Africa was the only one that had been founded upon Bible. I questioned the assumption really quickly. He didn't appreciate it. Yeah, it would be interesting. I don't even know what the history of South Africa is outside of the modern history since I don't know, maybe the 80s. I remember, was it F.W. de Klerk? Was he the last kind of white apartheid ruler of South Africa? I would assume, but I don't. In fact, I don't think it was not a British colony, was it? Rhodesia, just to the north, which became Zimbabwe, was a British colony. But South Africa was more of a Dutch colony? Is that right? I don't know. So what was it before the Dutch colony? Again, if I'm right on the Dutch colony, I'll catch up to you all are always waiting. By the time I get to the comments, I have to go back and talk about it again when I see that. But does someone know their history? So did the Dutch, in a way, the United States was a Dutch colony, wasn't it? New Holland, all of that. So do I have that right, that it was a Dutch colony? And so they are, maybe there was some kind of biblical founding in that. I suppose that was probably after the founding of the United States or the Declaration of Independence, but I could be totally wrong. Maybe it does predate. The Dutch were, but days of colonialism, I guess we talk about colonial days in the United States, but to me, it to be more after that. That took place, but very well, perhaps not. That part of the world, I know more about Zimbabwe than I do about South Africa. And Zimbabwe became Zimbabwe in 1981 when Robert Mugabe overthrew They had a revolution, remember? And he overthrew the Rhodesian government, named after Cecil Rhodes, the British. What was he? An explorer? I believe he was. Was he an explorer or a missionary? David Livingstone maybe was the missionary or the explorer. You see, it all gets kind of fuzzy, doesn't it? It's the time. It's the time of day. In the morning, I would know these things just so keenly, right? As some of you might now know those things. But let's see, got the Ozarks, Wisconsin here. Great to see all of you. And from the Ozarks, here's the question. Have you seen this? Have you seen this bill? Democrats introduce House Bill 6666 to award grants to eligible entities to conduct COVID-19 testing and contact tracing surveillance. I have not seen that one. Let's just see if we can pull that up here. And it looks like you're not fibbing. Possibly the trace bill. Here, I think I've pulled it up. And it is, let me enlarge that for you just a little bit. In the 116th Congress, that's where we are. COVID-19 testing, reaching, and contacting everyone. The TRACE Act by Representative Bobby Rush of Illinois. Oh, that sounds like a good thing. So it's only been introduced. And let's see the summary. A summary is in progress. Okay, don't have much there. The text may be too much for us to read right here. But isn't that interesting that it's 6666 to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 and related activities such as contact tracing through mobile health units and as necessary at individuals' residences and for other purposes. That's a little statement that always gets you in trouble there. You know, this issue here for other related issues such as contact tracing. As you know, I think that our civil liberties have already been trampled on, and that contact tracing and all that kind of stuff, that really is a surveillance kind of thing, and I will rebel over surveillance kind of things. In fact, let me say this: I said this to someone the other day, I believe on Facebook or something like that. I am not going to get tested for COVID-19 unless I'm sick and dying in the hospital and they really need to know. I have no interest in knowing just for my own, to say, hey, well, that's cool. I had COVID-19. Because I'm just not sure what they're going to do with that information. I know that already. At least I saw this on social media, so it must be true, that they are prohibiting entry into the Army by some people who have it. I don't know. I haven't read through the article to see how what they mean. Does that mean you can't come in for 14 days, come back in 14 days? I don't so much have a problem with that. But does that mean you can't join the Army? And does it get to, I wouldn't be surprised, does it get to you can't travel, you can't go to a sporting event, that you've got to have a star on your license plate or on your driver's license, in order to be proven of the Aryan race, and otherwise you're going to the concentration camp until you're, do I have some aluminum foil to put on? Quite, but that's close, isn't it? I'll try to stick it on there. And call it conspiracy theory or whatever, but I think we ought to be concerned about some of this surveillance that comes along. I think we let the cat out of the bag after 9/11, and we allow way too much intrusion after 9/11. And, dangerous thing, but so interesting. It's House Bill 6666. Let's see who we've got who we've got in this. I don't know all these names. Mr. Butterfield and Cardenas and Carson of Indiana, Cohen, Gonzalez, Democrat. I know there. And looks like, again, without having all the first names, and there being 400 something of them, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, there's a conservative, right? Ms. Napolitano, there's another one. Looks very much that even the name of that Trace Act, have you left a trace? We're going to follow your traces. I don't know. I think one of the things that we ought to start developing as Christians, develop in our mindset and start writing about and thinking about and communicating is, to what degree do we allow surveillance? Do we, as the mayor of Kansas City wanted, do the pastors provide names of those who were there? Suppose, as was, just a scenario that was given earlier in the broadcast, suppose somebody shows up Sunday while I'm video broadcasting and the door's unlocked and they come in. And somebody comes by from the government and says, hey, we heard some people were here. We want their names. Do we give it? Personally, my opinion is they can have their names when they pulled them out of my cold, dead hands, because that's a surveillance issue, and it's none of their business who comes. I'm going to at least make it hard for them and say you'll have to come yourself if you want. And I'll let them know when I'm broadcasting. And then I can promise you my sermon will change on the moment. I have been known to change my sermon instantly when I saw the scene at hand. So if they showed up, I would have a sermon about it. And I don't know if it would be well thought through, but it would certainly be passionate. Those of you on the viewing audience would say, I think he's got somebody there. In fact, you probably wouldn't even have to think of it, because I probably would say, we've got some people from the government coming to see who's here today. It might be interesting, wouldn't it? But I do think that Christians, and not even just Christians, freedom lovers, are going to have to decide, are we really going to allow them to know everything about us and to follow us and to know when we're home and when we have the light on in the bathroom and when we're on the internet and where we went to on the internet and everything else? And are we willing to put forth representatives in the city councils and in the state legislatures and in the House and the Senate and in the state houses around the country to put some laws that stop that kind of stuff? Do we want to live in a community that's got a camera on every corner and that has facial recognition on every corner? And so they no longer ask, where were you on the night of the 8th? They tell you, we know where you were on the night of the 8th because we saw your face as you drove through this intersection, and we then picked you up when you came down here, and when you took a left on such and such street, and you took a right down here, and we know exactly when you were somewhere, and you got home at 10:34 p.m. I think that's 1984-ish, and we ought to do something against it. So you'll watch that HR 6666, Mark of the Beast, and see what happens. Now, my guess is that it's a little bit of a political stunt that probably, again, as we go back to this, it's got to pass the House, and then it's got to pass the Senate, and it's got to go to the president. That's all a very good thing, because probably it never gets out of committee. And thus never passes the House. If it does, it's probably very different here. Let's see actions taken. And probably my guess is it's just been entered into the congressional record. It doesn't even look like it's written yet. That it's just a bill to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 and related issues, as we've talked about, of surveillance and watching you and making sure that you don't use whole milk. But anyway, it's got to go through all that process. So my guess is a little bit of this is just for show, that Bobby Rush of Illinois can go back home and say, blah, 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 and look good. And he knows it's not ever going to get out of committee, the Energy Committee, it looks like here, and it's not ever Energy and Commerce Committee. It's not ever going to get to the House floor. If it gets to the House floor, it's going to look very different than this. So in that sense, sleep well. But all of these things that are done, even if they're just for show and they know this is never going to pass the Senate, it's never going to pass, the president is never going to sign it. Why do they still do it? Because they know that inches the line a little bit forward. So keep an eye on it. If it does go anywhere, let your representative know. And if you go, every representative's up for election this year. So when you ask your representative a question at the next town hall meeting, can you have those? Online town hall meeting, whatever it is, ask them. Hey, in fact, even if it doesn't go anywhere, what do you think of Bobby Rush's House HR 6666? What's R stand for? HR 666, Mark of the Beast. Don't give away your answer. So could you comment on the Trace Act? That's all you need to say. Be careful when you ask questions, because sometimes you give away the answer, and then politicians give the answer they want you, that they think you want to hear. So if you really want to see if somebody's honest, do it this way. Say, hey, we really need more testing in our community. Bobby Rush has put forth the Trace Act, which gives some grants for testing in our community. What's your position on this? Could you tell us, is there any hope of that? And then, oh, yes, I love it, I love it, I love it, because I'm a politician and I think you're telling me that you want it and I love it. And then, could I have a follow-up question? Why in the world would you want an act that's got all of this surveillance in it? Is that a little tricky? Well, they're snaky politicians, so go for it. Be a little tricky. But at minimum, don't tell them that you're against it ahead of time. Just say, could you speak about the Trace Act and your position on it? Find out what they say. And see what it is there. Judy, good to see you in Katy, Texas. Judith, and Joanne, good to see you. Your husband's asleep tonight, and you're up late. Glad you're here. Now, you see, I'm always behind on the comments. Pastor Rick, interesting that the Germans forced surrender to the United Nations. Also, Truman called the enemy evil. He did. Again, that was a day in which things were much more black and white. I think we need that today. You don't hear much talk like that today, Rick says, at least on one side of the aisle. And that's sadly very, very true through all of that. Okay, let me get back to where I was here. Let's see what you got. You're right, Dan. There is the danger that this video will get banned because it showed a symbol that goes like this. And I won't say the name of the symbol because they read things, but they blew up the symbol. Isn't that nice? And put an American flag over it before that. That's just the sweetest thing I've seen all day. And God bless them for what they did. Judith, I think you're probably right. When you think about someone like Truman, she said the Democrats back then were what Republicans are today. Now, certainly, if you go to an FDR had principles that principles of socialism, all of the issues that he was dealing with. But it was an unusual time as well, and our Republican president has handed out a lot of money in social programs in the last few days too. So maybe you're just totally right. But I certainly with Truman, I think he'd probably fit in the Republican Party. We talked about Eisenhower one of these days, and Eisenhower, of course, who followed Truman. They didn't even know what party he was going to run in until he announced there was a Draft Ike, movement, a Draft Ike movement. They didn't even know what party he was going to run in. They just wanted him. They almost didn't care what party he was going to run in. They just wanted Ike. They knew the man. That's not a bad thing, is it? If there isn't such animosity between the two parties that you couldn't do something like that. Sorry, I see some of you at least had some buffering, and hope you're not doing too much of that there. It may have been a while back there. Let's see here. Yeah, Sarah, Schiff should be censored. He should resign. Wasn't Schiff in the know and behind the whole Flynn thing? And now that the Flynn thing and all those papers that have come out, again, I haven't really keeping, but Schiff, maybe he's a traitor. He's certainly not good for America. He's almost enemy number one. And yet, as Stephen says, former FBI official Andrew McCabe won't face charges, neither will the others who set up Flynn. And I'm afraid that might be right. That's my fear. For whatever reason, Republicans are never as cutthroat as the Democrats are. The Democrats will take an innocent guy and put him in the prison by hook and crook and whatever it takes to get him there. The Republicans say there's a chance that this law actually is interpreted this way, and if somebody does that, and it might not be right, and so it's a 99% chance that he's broken this law, but there's a 1% chance that he's not, and so with an abundance of caution, we're not going to prosecute this case. And I think Republicans need to step up to the plate on this, and the reason is, again, it is if it can happen to Flynn, who was a 4-star general, wasn't it? If it can happen to him, it can certainly happen to Randy and Robin in Florida now. Welcome. Good to see you. But I'm with you, Sarah. I hope to see some justice by God's mercy and grace. I feel like they're trying to blackball AG Attorney General Barr, and the ever complicit media screams the lies. Yeah, I am so glad that I have my life and not Attorney General Barr's life, or President Trump's life for that matter, or Vice President Pence's life, or all of those guys that are up there trying to fight through all of that kind of stuff, and to deal with all of that. Earlier we had the question about Romans 13. Scott gives a good word. Paul knew nothing of a constitutional republic where the entire Constitution is about limiting the powers of the government. I would agree that there is a biblical role for government, but in the United States, we have defined government as we the people. And we the people have told the government what they can do, and the government has no authority. So the higher power is actually the people. And the people need to remind the government that if it's not expressly written in the Constitution, you can't do it. You are illegal in doing it. And I think the people need to really take a lot of things to court here of late. And again, take them to the Supreme Court, because that protects some other people. So, I'm glad this lady in Dallas, the haircutting lady, I don't know her personally. I'm glad that some people stepped up to the plate and got her out of that ridiculous fine and 7 days in prison because she said, I'm going to open my business. And she went and she did it. I don't have a problem with the county judge saying, shame on you. I hope nobody ever goes to your business. The business is named, Supercuts or whatever. And it's down at this street. And she's the worst hair cutter in the world. And if you go there, you're going to be UGLY. You won't have no alibi because you're ugly if you go there. I don't care if she says that or he says that. I guess is it she or a he that's the judge in Dallas County. But to put her in prison over laws that are likely unconstitutional, I'm glad. I don't know if Governor Abbott's been all that good in this thing, because I haven't kept up with him, but he certainly was good in that. And also in the Harris County judge, Houston area, she said that you can't go out of your house without a bag over your head and without being enclosed in a plastic bubble. And the governor said, no. She didn't have that authority and she can't do it. But yeah, we've got this constitutional republic, and that's what makes the difference, isn't it? As we determine, do we have to obey the crackpot county judge, or are we the people the higher power? Are there some things here that are being misused? And if so, should I carry out my civil liberties? Should Rosa Parks have obeyed the authorities? Sat at the back of the bus? Get back there, woman. I don't think so. I think she was brave and did the right thing. And I think most of America does too. So, all of these self-righteous, left-leaning evangelicals who want to shout out Romans 13 here, ask them if they apply Romans 13 to Rosa Parks. My guess is they don't. Well, that's different. That's different. It's not different. They're telling us you can't go to church. I think you decide whether you can go to church. Don't let your pastor decide for you. Don't let your neighbor decide for you. If you're under 18, then let your mom or dad decide for you. But if you're over 18, you decide what you're going to do if you live outside of their house. And I hope, Judith, you're right, that those complicit in the FBI will be punished, and punished big time. I think the FBI and probably the CIA are some of the most messed up deep state organizations we have in our government. And I just hope that Donald Trump will clean those out. And I hope he'll do it quickly, because I think he's going to be reelected, but it's way too early to tell. It's almost unimaginable for me to imagine how anybody could vote for who's the guy hiding in his basement? Joe, vote for Joe. But people will do it, and American politics is so fickle that it really doesn't matter how they feel today. It's going to matter how they feel on the first Tuesday of November. So for that reason, I hope he cleans it out quickly. But he's a busy man, too, so I don't know. We'll see. We've got some betting going on here. Gambling in the house tonight. Steven's betting $100 that it doesn't happen. Anyone want to take Steven up on his bet there? I'll be the broker. Is that what a guy does when he is it go between? I don't know gambling. I'm a Baptist preacher. I don't know about these things. I had to look up the word bet when it was on there. I did it very quickly. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, Judith is a Baptist too. She said, I don't bet. Me either. Pure as the driven snow, as a matter of fact. Never, I'm trying to make sure this is not a lie. I'm pretty sure it's not a lie that I have never bought a lottery ticket. I've been given a few. And I did go ahead and scratch them off or look at the numbers, whatnot, because it was a gift. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You take it in case there's $1 million there or something. I've never cashed one in, so obviously I've never won anything with those. That's a bad gift, isn't it? Lorna, someone in New Zealand took our health department to court as they were being confined to quarantine and they weren't allowed to visit their dying parent. The man won his case. One small victory. Amen. Now, I've been wondering, is New Zealand a place that has a lot of civil liberties and freedom-loving people? I kind of picture New Zealand as a place where it's a little bit, like we used to be, don't tread on me, leave me alone, let me live my life. I kind of picture Australia that way as well, but both of you are part of the crown. And so I don't know if that's just a bad picture and it's just that it's a long way away and it has nice beaches and mountains. And so I think kindly of it. But I'm glad there is that good case in New Zealand. So, Lorna, give us your opinion. I'll catch up with it here in a moment. But give me your opinion. Is New Zealand a safe haven for freedom-loving individuals? Or is it not a safe haven for freedom-loving individuals? But that's very interesting that he was confined to quarantine, not allowed to visit his dying parent, and won the case. I think one of the worst things that's been done in this thing is the closing off of nursing homes from family. I understand why they did it, and I don't know what decision I would have made. So, I'm a little bit of an armchair quarterback here. It's a very difficult kind of thing because of the terrible tragedies we had in some nursing homes. But at the same time, you have people out there, people in the nursing homes that, yeah, you can tell them, and you can tell them every day why their husband's not coming to visit them or their daughter or whatever. And yet you can't tell them enough. They don't understand it. And where their mind goes and the depression that goes in there, because the poor people that are working there are literally poor people. Typically, they're not paid much, and they're doing the best they can. I'll give them every benefit of the doubt on that thing. But they've got enough patience and enough paperwork, unfortunately, that they've got to do, that they're not able just to sit and provide the care that a family member is going to be able to do. And so that brings about a decline in mental health, and a decline in mental health brings about a decline in physical health. And how many deaths were there in nursing homes, not from COVID, but rather from abandonment? And they probably sensed it as abandonment. I don't know the solution to that. I just know that the solution we had might not have been the best thing. And I don't know if someone tried to test it to see, is it really legal when you've got your loved one in a private nursing home or a public nursing home for them to say, sorry, daughter, son, husband, wife, you cannot go in ever until we say so. I don't know. Of course, it would so much depend on circumstances, but I might have just said, bring her out here. I'm taking her home. But again, so many varying circumstances on that sometimes that's just impossible through that to see here. Hey, Neil in Vulcan, Alberta, Canada. Good to see you. So now we have one, two, three countries. I'm not sure. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the U.S. It's 4. I sometimes need to tally. Anybody else here tonight? So South Africa is mostly Dutch Reformed. I thought so. I am not familiar with the Mandela effect. I got off track earlier. We were talking about the history of South Africa. I remember F.W. de Klerk. I remember the whole apartheid thing, which was, as I recall, more complicated than it seemed on the surface. And indeed, I think even in these days has turned out to be more complicated. Now we're, 35 years from apartheid? So I'm just guessing here because apartheid was, maybe it wasn't quite that long ago. But it was late 80s anyway. And, Nelson Mandela and all that kind of stuff. And what happened in Zimbabwe was a few years ahead of South Africa, and you could just see what was coming. And what happened in South Africa happened in many cases to the white farmers then. And in South Africa, what a mess. But I'm not familiar with the Mandela effect. I'll have to look that up and see what the Mandela effect was. Was the Ford emblem always the Ford emblem like today? I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's very retro looking today. And looks like, here we go. News of the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal. 7 facts about the Ford emblem. The Ford logo has changed only a handful of times in the company's 114-year history. The lettering of the Ford emblem first appeared in the 1903 Model A. The original emblem is nothing like the modern counterpart. Designers have made 8 major Ford changes since 1903. Henry Ford designed the signature Ford emblem using a stencil. The term blue oval started appearing in books in 1907. In the 60s, nearly saw a total redesign of the Ford emblem. And there we see some of the minor changes. Is that one they were trying to bring about in 66? Yeah. It looks 60-ish. The color of the Ford emblem slightly changed in 2003. Yeah. Now you know about that. I have heard, I have not researched this, that Henry Ford was anti-Semitic. And that is the reason there are so many Muslims in the Detroit area, because he brought them in because he didn't like the Jews. And, what is it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so he brought that in. I don't know if that's true, the anti-Semitism of Ford, but I have heard that. Is that right? Congressman Bobby Rush, 6666, was the defense minister of the Black Panthers in the 60s. I didn't know that. I do agree with the comment here that Lorna gives. Contact tracing equals Big Brother tracing. Yeah, just way too much of that. Neil says church is supposed to be an independent government, not reporting to a political government. I agree. A church is almost, and this is not exclusively true, but a church is almost like an embassy on foreign soil. That land upon which the embassy sits is actually sovereign territory for the country that has the embassy. And there's a sense in which the church is like that as well. Joanne says these so-called mobile health units could mean mandatory vaccination in your own home. Yeah, that's another thing. I don't know what the consequences would be, but I'm not interested in getting tested, and I'm not interested in getting vaccinated. I don't know what's in that vaccine, and I don't know if you can convince me what's in that vaccine. I don't know that I need what's in that vaccine. I think that there's too many agendas behind that vaccine. So I'm not interested in the vaccine. Dr. Fauci, we can't go back to work till we get a vaccine. I guess I won't go back to work. I'll just, broadcast from up here in the shed and do it that way. Again, that would be my personal decision. I would fight it. I think that I have a constitutional right not to be vaccinated. I don't know that this has ever been tested, because obviously there's been a lot of issue about discussion about vaccines. I don't necessarily want to get into it. I think it's kind of a personal issue. But I do think that my body is belongs to me, and I hate to use the term "my body, my choice," but I'll go ahead and use it for this particular instance. I get to decide whether or not you poke something in me and squirt some kind of fluid within me. And not the government tells me that has to happen. I get to decide. And I think that's true with children's vaccinations as well, that the parent gets to decide. Now, the state may say, well, they can't go to public schools if they don't do that. I don't have a problem with that. I think that would be a benefit to not take public school vaccinations and get injected with their agenda. No problem there. But yeah, I like that, Deb. If I'm asked for names, I'll just act like I have dementia. Who are you again? That's good. Like Sleepy Joe. That's right. Amen and amen. Very good. 3 stars. Okay. Talking about Flynn, a lieutenant general. When I was saying General Flynn, I thought something sounded wrong there. So Lieutenant General Flynn, 3 stars. That's 3 more than I've got. What he went through, and there's been a lot of study about this, and again, it's an area I don't know about, but I just know that there's issue that there are confessions, even of major crimes that people didn't do. I don't think you can always take a confession at its face value, and I think even courts have to look into and say, okay, yeah, she confessed, he confessed, whatever, but we still have to have the evidence on top of a confession. And here, the evidence was absolutely opposed to it. And if indeed Michael Flynn was protecting his son and or his family and some other things, or just trying to get the thing to go away, there ought to be a way to back out of that. There's some emotional duress that goes through there. Ted Cruz gave her $7,000 to get her out of jail, flew to Dallas today to get his hair cut. I saw the picture of him sitting there. His hair was looking kind of long, too, in the back there. It was almost as long as his beard in the front. Good for him. I saw also Sean Hannity was giving her some money or something like that. Through that. Let's see. Someone asked, Dan asked, did you watch Atlas Shrugged on YouTube? Looks a lot like it today. Who is John Galt? I started it a couple of weeks ago. I've never watched the movie. I started it. I actually, I think I was watching it on Amazon Prime, and it was interesting and enjoyable. But then I got away and didn't finish. I watch very few movies. When I do watch a movie, I almost have to go to the theater. Otherwise, I fall asleep in the chair and don't ever finish the movie. Do any of you have it? But if I'm in the theater and I've got a Coke and some popcorn, then I can do it. But I mean, I might do that twice a year. So I don't see very many movies. But I need to go back and finish that because I think it is probably relevant to today. But yeah, good for Ted Cruz for going to get his hair cut by that lady and paying her $7,000 or giving her $7,000 to do that. And Burger King's old motto, rules were made to be broken. Yeah, let's take the Burger King motto, right? And I won't mention who snuck in the door of the Independent Living Center, just in case there's contact tracing going on here. New Zealand is heading down the socialist track. Okay, I was afraid that might be. Our prime minister is being hailed as the mother of our country. She was the head of the socialist youth when she was younger, and she's only in her 30s. That doesn't sound very good. Is there a country on earth that's not headed towards socialism and that values individual rights and individual liberties? I don't know of it. I'm almost thinking the best you can do, well, the best you can do is probably the United States. But Neil, you're in Canada. Tell us what you think. Canada seems to be a very socialist country. But maybe the best you can do today is just hope for a government that kind of leaves you alone. But do you find those anymore? I'm not sure. Tara says the Osage, is it Osage or Osage? I've seen that word, 100 times, but the Osage Casino opened in Ponca City, but they asked the 65 plus to please stay home. They don't mean that, or they would have no one there. That's why I was laughing as you said that. It's like, don't you have to be 65 to get in? I don't know what it is. I'm not 65 yet, so maybe this is the issue, but I don't know what the attraction is. But when I drive by the casinos here in New Mexico and the parking lots are always full, I'm always thinking, what is so exciting about, sticking quarters and pulling the bar or whatever it is that you do in there? I don't know. I've actually only walked through one casino in my entire life. And it was nicely decorated. It was in New Orleans. I was there for a meeting and it was next to our hotel, and I walked through it. And that's the only time I've been in a casino. But honestly, I don't really know what the appeal is. The closest thing to the appeal to me is that sometimes they offer prime rib or lobster for a good price, and I see the billboards, and I think, oh, that looks nice. Maybe I'll go get the prime rib. But I think you got to be a certified gambler to get the good price. I'm not sure how all that works. But so only the under 64 and under can go to the Osage Casino. Osage, that casino, the one in Ponca City. Yeah, they probably should have just stayed closed. Back in New Zealand, our election in September will be tremendously important for our future. Mind you, we have no real conservatives running, so it's a foregone conclusion. That's unfortunate for New Zealand and for freedom-loving people, even who don't live in New Zealand, but want places to go sometime, someday, a possibility out there for that. I think, again, probably the best thing you can do is hope for a government that doesn't intrude very much. And within a country like the United States, figure out where you can be state-wise and even municipality-wise, because you can have a lot of difference. For example, I live between Taos and Angel Fire, New Mexico. And Angel Fire is just a little ski town, and Taos is a ski and art town, tourist town. Taos is very liberal. Angel Fire is very conservative. Taos is very Democrat. Angel Fire is very Republican, and Taos County is Bernie Sanders territory, and Colfax County, right next to it, is Donald Trump territory. The reason is because it's all Texas homeowners that come in and live in Angel Fire and Red River and Eagle Nest and those places there. Let's see. What about Cuomo in New York? Governor Cuomo, putting people with COVID-19 into nursing homes. Yeah, I don't understand at all why he did that. I don't understand why he is not being held accountable for that, because there were hospitals. That whole thing of we're going to overrun our hospitals. And we talked about that on one of our previous programs here, the hospital they're building in Albuquerque for COVID-19. And, they brought the Mercy ship into New York, and it's already gone because they didn't need it. And even the Samaritan's Purse Hospital I saw last night, I think Franklin Graham said they've had like 138 patients or something like that, which is not really very many for the trouble and the expense they went to. And by the way, let me say, I saw Franklin Graham last night on maybe Laura Ingram's show. I just happened to turn it on when I went to bed and sort of dozed off with it, but he was on there. And he and I probably wouldn't agree with everything theologically, but one thing I can say about Franklin Graham is every time I hear him, he finds a way to put the gospel into whatever he's talking about. I think more of us ought to learn to do that. Just to, when we're asked something, to be able to express the fact that God loves you and He's sent His Son to be your Savior, and He's offering a gift of eternal life that's paid for by His Son. He's offering it to any man, woman, boy, or girl. And Franklin Graham has a good way. All of the Graham family, really, beginning with Billy Graham, had a good way of always making sure that was stuck in there. Again, I might do some things a little different. I definitely would do some things a little different. I'm not Franklin Graham. He's not Randy White. But back to the issue, why in the world did Cuomo put COVID-19 into the nursing homes that the son can't even go visit his mother? What's up with that? And why aren't the people of New York saying, hey, this is not what should be done, and it's not acceptable. Let's just see here. The Mandela effect refers to a situation in which a large mass of people believes that an event occurred when it did not. Looking at the origin of the Mandela effect, some famous examples as well as some potential explanations for this strange confluence of perceptions can help shed light on this unique phenomenon. The name Mandela effect began when it was first coined in 2009 by Ms. Broom, who published a website detailing her observance of the phenomenon. She began to talk to other people about her memories. She learned that she was not alone. Other people remembered seeing news coverage of his death, as well as a speech by his widow. Very, very interesting group memory of something that didn't happen. In fact, there it is on the headline: when masses of people believe an event occurred when it didn't. That just speaks to me about the power of suggestion, the power of psychological suggestion, the psychological effect of suggestion, and the ability to sway the masses if you know how to work that Mandela effect. Very interesting. Who was it that said that? Dan, thank you. I'm gonna read up some more on that and see what all of that was about. And Mel, I will not do vaccines or digital ID. It's a definite conditioning for the mark. Yeah, of course, I'm a pre-trib, premillennialist, so are you. But why help make it easy for the Antichrist? Why don't we make it difficult for the Antichrist? Why don't we put out another argument out there that makes the Antichrist have to work a little harder? I mean, let's just don't bring along speaking of psychological effects. Let's not encourage that. Bethel, is that how you say it? Bothell, Washington. Joshua Freed won a major victory in federal court this afternoon when the governor was forced to concede before a federal judge that he cannot enforce his blanket ban on in-person religious gatherings of any size. The favorable development comes nearly 1 week after Freed filed an emergency temporary restraining order in the Western District of Washington against Governor Jay Inslee's constitutional order. God bless you, Joshua Freed, for taking it to court. And so the governor was forced to concede that he cannot enforce. There was a what do you call this? When you ask the court to stop something, there was one of those in New Mexico by an Albuquerque church that didn't go so well, but I think it was the way it was the circumstances at hand. I think there needs to be more tests of that. I think every state is going to have to do it until they win. And the problem is that sometimes these cases, you lose them not because it wasn't a valid legal argument or constitutional argument, but because you worded it wrong, or the governor had worded things just enough that, you get by these things, or you didn't exactly know the angle at which to come. So in New Mexico or wherever it is, until you get a case like Joshua Freed's, where you have these victories that are given against Governor Inslee, then I think Christians ought to just continue to do it. Again, you can discuss in your own community, is it prudent for us to go to church right now? And a church itself can discuss, is it prudent for us to be, what kind of building do you have? Can you spread people out? Do you have any germ cleanser on hand? Do you have running water? Can you open the windows? Something like that. So let the church decide, and let the individual members of the church decide, but it's not the governor's place to decide these things. Judith speaks about aborted baby tissues. You can decline vaccines. Texas has a law that you do not have to take vaccines. I think that's different in some of the other states. I think that in New Mexico, there is still a religious exemption for vaccines, but some of the others, I think maybe not. And there may not even be that religious exemption if you want to send your children to public schools. I don't know why you'd want to do that when there is the John Nelson Darby Academy, and you can have your child home learning right there with you through jndarbyacademy.org. Now back to our program. Yeah, Stephen says, he says, you're correct. Why, thank you for the 2 thumbs up. The church is a foreign embassy. Never thought of that. I think churches and their liberties need to hold on to this. Speaking of that, because of who the church is, I've got an article here somewhere that I started to write. I haven't written it, but I'll go ahead and show you my outline, which is 3 lines. No, 4 lines. I may not write it now because it's getting a little dated, but the article that I was going to write is why churches should not take a PPP loan. That is a payroll protection plan loan. I put 3 reasons here. Number 1, because you would have to ask, I should put a question mark there, can it be done without a congregational meeting? In many churches, to borrow money, this does relate here in just a moment to being a sovereign entity. But in many cases, in order to borrow money, the congregation has to approve that. Well, if the congregation can't get together, how does the congregation approve that? So then does that get you in legal issues later when maybe even the government says, you, pastor, took out an unauthorized loan, or you trustees, or you deacons, or you whoever, you took out an unauthorized loan, and now we're holding you responsible for this loan. I think churches ought to consider that. Every church is going to be different in their governing issues here, but my church couldn't meet without having, couldn't borrow money without a congregational meeting. And I think many congregational churches are that way. And even many elder-led churches require a congregational vote for these things. Then my second point was, can the church pay it back? We don't have to pay it back. Yeah. Maybe you don't, but there's something of a just trust us on this whole payback issue. I think the law's pretty vague. I would not be surprised when it comes time to pay back some of these PPP loans if they don't say, oh, no, actually, you had to, the employees had to stand on their heads for 15 minutes a day with a mask, and your employees only stood on their heads, and therefore, it does not qualify. I won't be surprised if there's a lot of gotchas on this, and those loans do have to be paid back. So if a church takes one of those loans, it better know we can pay it back. I don't think they should take one, but they need to know that. And then this is the one that hits the mark here on the church being a sovereign foreign embassy. Can the church conscientiously take government funds? Now, I am one who holds to the separation of the church and state. Can I say I hold to the separation of church and state except when the state is offering some money? Then I need to take it. Now, you go to Romania. I've got several Romanian Baptist pastor friends. You go to Romania, and in Romania, the state pays the preachers. They give money to the church, and then that's for the pastor's salary. Only the Baptists, among all the various denominations in Romania, only the Baptists have refused it. Why? I guess because only the Baptists remember the days of communism. And they know that there are strings attached to that money, and we will be free and independent. Now, the reason I thought of the PPP loans here, payroll protection plan loans, is because I don't think payroll protection plans in the United States apply to the embassy of Venezuela or Colombia or Ecuador or Israel or South Africa or New Zealand or Australia. I don't think those embassies can apply for a PPP loan. Well, why? Because they're foreign entities. They're not under the domain of the U.S. government. I really do think that a church, when it's taking that loan, is saying, we are under the domain of the U.S. government, and we are in need of the government's assistance in order to continue. I think that's it's a bad thing from the beginning. And for the most part, I think churches have already found that their people give even when they're not there in person. They gave because they loved the church in the first place, or they thought they were going to go to hell if they didn't, and they still feel that way. And so they give, whether they're there or not. And if they lose their jobs, obviously they have no money to give, and they can't do that. But a PPP loan is not going to help through all of that. Oh yeah, I said I wasn't a 4-star general, but look, 1, 2, I just gotta be in the right spot and point the right way. Yeah, I got stars on my shoulder. Let's see, CNA job. Is the hardest job with the least pay. Remind me what that stands for. Certified nurse associate. It's the people that work in the nursing homes. You're right. Hardest job, least pay. I think it was with my son and daughter-in-law and Shelley and I. We were out walking, and for some reason that subject came up of how pitiful nursing home people are paid. Why is that? Who's getting the money? Because, the things are very expensive to go in. Somebody's getting the money. Where's all that going? I don't know, because they're pitifully paid. That ought to change some way, because those people, you're right. Hardest job with the least pay. New York, going on with Sarah's comment, New York did not train staff before the government mandated the COVID-19 elderly to be returned to homes with empty beds on that boat with the Samaritans as well. Yeah, a lot of mixing up all that and not training through all that. I know Governor Cuomo was on the news every day talking, yak, yak, yak. But I think there were a lot of mistakes in some of what was done there and carried out there. Let's see, Fox News, The Five, a lawyer, the lady explained that over 90% of both state and federal criminal proceedings are done by plea bargains. She was not a fan. I'm sure she's right. Obviously, she's a lawyer and knows what she's talking about and is on Fox News, so it must be true, right? But I've seen some of this myself. Now, a plea bargain, of course, is in a criminal offense, but even in a civil offense, they don't call it a plea bargain, but what is it? They come to an agreement, and so it never goes to the court. I can tell you that at one point, one of the churches that I pastored had a lawsuit that came to it. It fortunately was, fortunately for me, I guess, it was a lawsuit that was related to some things before I became the pastor of the church. And then what happens is really as they sue the church, they're really suing the insurance company. And so the insurance company takes it over. And the insurance company, it's all financial for them. And so in that case, they looked at it. They said, we can take it to court and we can win. And it'll cost us, 50% more than if we just write this check right here. So we're going to have to write a check. Either way, let's settle and cut our losses. I think that happens over and over. I think that's a problem with the American civil justice system, is that you can do that, and they really kind of have some handcuffs on you right from the beginning, because it's going to be such an expense that you settle. That's what I'm trying to say. Settle. You settle out of court, because to have a lawyer and all that kind of stuff, and what's going to happen, I think that ought to be fixed. And even the plea bargains. I don't know. I've never been a prosecutor, and I know that they use those plea bargains sometimes to get confessions and some of that kind of stuff. But isn't there another way to get confessions without a plea bargain? I don't know those things. It's not my wheelhouse. But I would say I'm not a fan of settling out of court, and I'm not a fan of the plea bargain either. I think we need some changes to our justice system, because these things, due to expenses, this is what we've got. It's almost the insurance of the expense world compared to the health world. Osage, thank you, Bob, up in Minnesota. Osage. Now I know how to say that. I know that in Amarillo, Texas, there was an exit that when you exited off of I-40, you could go to two streets. One was Ross, and one was, now I know how to say it, Osage. But if you say it Osage, then you take the raw sausage exit. And so they had the raw sausage exit, because a lot of people pronounced it Osage. So Ross Osage, you get it, the raw sausage exit. But the Ross Osage exit, that does it's a little cleaner look. But it's Amarillo too, so raw sausage probably fits. And the next comment was making me hungry. She's talking about the lobster a long time ago. See, I'm always so far behind on the comments. Billy, good to see you in Kentucky. Good news in Kentucky, as we will be heading back to Church House, as Governor Andy Beshear's prohibition of religious services was ruled unconstitutional by 2 federal courts. This is 2 states now. So we've got Washington, we've got Kentucky, and I perfectly love the way you read that. You wrote that, Governor Beshear's prohibition of religious services. That is what just about every governor across the country had, is a prohibition of religious services. Originally in New Mexico, and I think you could still actually push this, originally in New Mexico, there was an exemption for places of worship. This was right at the beginning, when I think there was a limit of 50 people, so you can tell that was early on. But when the limit went from 50 down to 5, hopefully my memory is serving me correctly, and this is not the Mandela effect, that's when our governor, Governor Wuhan, put a prohibition on. She removed the religious exemption. Now, I think the way she worded that, as I was listening, was so careful. I think she was trying to squeeze by. She was lawyered up when she got there. But that is that's a good word there. I'm glad that it was ruled unconstitutional by 2 federal courts, and. If it's unconstitutional in Kentucky, according to the 14th Amendment, isn't it unconstitutional in New Mexico, in California, and everywhere else? Back to the Grahams, Billy was too ecumenical. I went to a crusade before I knew this. It was hard for me to accept the truth about Billy. I have now. It was hard for me, too, because I was a Baptist, a Southern Baptist, and Billy Graham was a Southern Baptist. But I never even understood when I would hear the fundamentalist Baptists talk about how he's too ecumenical. But I look at it now, and I've questioned the assumptions, and he really was too ecumenical when you've got the Catholics and the Baptists working together on counseling when they get down there. That really is too ecumenical through that difficult issue there, through all of that. But good news for Kentucky. Tara in Oklahoma. A public service announcement. Call your reps and tell them to vote no on HB 6666, testing, reaching, and contacting everyone. The Trace Act. I think this is definitely a good idea. I talked about the discussions in the next time your congressman comes along or congresswoman. Go to those meetings. Congressmen and women, they actually are very accessible because they're going to be up for election. So, they meet down at the diner or whatever, and if you keep your ear to the ground, you can find out where these are. Go to them and ask some of these questions. But I agree with you. Call them and let them know you're against the Trace Act. And I think that's very helpful. Let's see. Let's see. We were still, good for you, Billy, who's raising his kids right. I know that too. We were still going to the church house, but the governor is now being held accountable for his misuse of power. Amen. Again, there has been so much misuse of power by governors all across the country. And if we're going to be honest, maybe even by President Trump and on a federal level, though the federal government in this case don't have the powers in the local communities and the local states to do all that for it. So for the most part, you can put it on the governors there. But just almost exclusively across the country, a few places that didn't abuse power. And once again, as I've said maybe 3 times tonight, if the governor needs to stand on the rooftop and beg people, go for it. But to prohibit what the government can't prohibit, and for the people to allow that, is going to be a very dangerous thing into the future. And that is dangerous. Tara says the Department of Justice wrote a letter to the Norman, Oklahoma dictator to let her know that she can't allow some gatherings, but not religious ones. This is a violation, and they will help her amend as needed. I've wondered about this, especially lately. The more this thing goes on, in fact, I've noticed it in our town. The roads are busy, and they're not as busy as during tourist season like they should be right now. But they're busy. Everybody's out and about. You go to the grocery store, it's busy, and to the hardware store, it's busy. And I'm wondering, how is it that, in fact, is there any sanity here? Basically, we're telling everybody to gather at one spot. Go to the grocery store, the gas station, the hardware store, and the pharmacy, and the long line at the bank. Let's all meet there. Wouldn't it be better just to open places up, even if you say we want you to limit, to whatever, so many people per square foot or whatever. Even if you do that, then instead of everybody being at the grocery store, some people are at the florist and some people are at the garden center, the nursery, and some people are at the, wherever it is. They're spread out that way. I think we're actually encouraging by the policies, the government policies, we're encouraging people to only go to certain places. And that obviously brings about more people. And in those places, has there been, excuse me, by the employees in those places, has there been a huge COVID-19 outbreak? The grocery stores, Kroger, Albertsons, all that kind of stuff. Do they have a whole bunch of their workers that have COVID-19? Because all of the public, everybody has been to the grocery store and bought toilet paper and hamburger. They've all been there. So if somebody's got COVID, they've been to the grocery store. Well, shouldn't we be seeing a rise in that among the cashiers and the people who are having to work there? The post office. Everybody's gone to the post office. I've been there. I've seen the lines. The bank is a drive-through. That's probably a little bit different where you can't quite go in there. But I haven't heard about it anyway. Maybe there is an increase at the post office, but at my post office, it's the same people that have always been there. Some very nice people that work there and take books from me every day as I hand them over the counter and we ship those things to them. I was going to just maybe remind you of the book that you ought to read, but I don't see where it is. There it is. Like when I go to the post office to deliver Patrick Henry, American Statesman, for only $19.99, the ridiculously low price of $19.99. And you can even order it today. It's not going to ship for a couple of weeks because it's at the printer right now. But when you order it, you'll download it. That's just a public service announcement right there. Bob said, how does a Catholic counsel? Yeah, you know what? I saw something the other day talking about counseling, like Billy Graham crusade. And I don't know who put this together. I'm going to see. I don't see the exact one that was on there. But let's go for this one. This is not the one I saw, but Steps of Salvation from Sinner to Saved. God's part, man's part. God sent his son, Jesus shed his blood, Spirit revealed the word, hear the gospel, believe the gospel, repent of sins, confess of sins, baptized into Christ, remain faithful. That is not necessarily exclusively, it's not really a Catholic plan of salvation. The one I saw the other day was very much a Catholic plan of salvation that included on these steps here, it had the sacraments, that you've got to, take the Blessed Sacrament in order to receive the body and blood. So, yeah, how do they counsel in that regard? And how many people end up then going into the Catholic Church and getting the theology of there of the Catholic Church? So many tough issues there. But Terry, you're right. We can all meet at the plumbing section at Home Depot for church. Let's meet in aisle 14. And we can do it. Unfortunately, I have a small church, so we probably could do it and would be blessed by that. So Mel says, I did not see priests or nuns at the crusade. My husband made a public confession at the crusade. The booklet was given, from what I recall. I learned later. I never forgot the Christian protests. Christian groups were protesting the crusade. I've never forgot the gentleman's pleading face. I think we would have to say God works in mysterious ways, and that there's so much. There are. I, as with my formerly NASB-stained fingers, preaching evangelical mixed up theology. Even through that was God used that, and that was a blessing to to a lot of people. So much better. Rather than just saying, well, there's some good that comes out of it, we ought to say, well, what better can come out of it? What could we do to fix this and take care of all of that? Well, it is about bedtime, and I am glad that you have joined us tonight. Don't forget that the war ended. Nazi war ends 3:01 p.m. Truman calls on the U.S. to continue its job. Work to take care of the Japanese. And to bring all of that about. But in the end, what happened? They created the Cold War with that map right there. Unfortunate, but this is Victory in Europe Day. Some 75 years ago today. And, just for the fun of it, I think before we close, we should see. I was gonna say we should see. I've got some sound coming from somewhere. I was gonna show you that. I tell you what, we're gonna do it soundless is what we're going to do, because I got too many tabs open and something is playing there, and that's not what I want to be playing. Now I can't find I got so many tabs open that I don't know what's there. And I'm going to find the tab I want. There we go. Just for fun, let's see it again. That no, we're not going to have the sound here on this one, but look at the American flag covering up that Nazi symbol. We won't say the word lest we get cut off from YouTube tonight. But there is victory 75 years ago at that place that is so famous. And that Nazi symbol, oh, look at it go. Now that, my friends, that's the way it should be done. That is Americanism, and that is a blessing. And I'm glad that you were here with us tonight. It has been fun to have this informal discussion going on tonight. It's been a blessing as we approach the midnight hour here in New Mexico anyway. For some of you, it's approaching the 2 a.m. hour, isn't it? But this has been the Theological Insomniac. I'm Randy White, and we've had late night commentary on the normal, the abnormal, and the paranormal. And I don't know how to turn on the music and play the music, the closing music, so we don't have any music tonight. But it has been a blessing. Watch out for the Mandela effect, like thinking the lion will lie down with the lamb. But the Bible never says that. Yeah, it does. The lion will lay down with the lamb. Yeah, it says that. It says that. I saw it in there. It's the Mandela effect, isn't it, Stephen in Florida? Thank you. Appreciate all of that. What a blessing to have each one of you. And we shall see you on Sunday morning. This is the Theological Insomniac. Good night.